So this week, the State Theatre, in partnership with the Sello Maake Foundation, will be showcasing the new stage play called Bloke and His American Bantu. The offering is directed by the internationally acclaimed television and theatre actor, that's director Sello Maake himself, and written by prominent author Dr Siphiwo Mahala. Now, Bloke and His American Bantu looks at a friendship that led to an international solidarity of some kind and cultural exchange between South Africa and Black America, broadly speaking. For more on this play and for his thoughts around many other issues, let's bring in Dr. Sello himself, who's with us in studio. What an honor. Thanks very much indeed for making the trip.
I am on TV.
I'm sure it's not the first time.
Actually, it's not often. Thank you, Ayat.
It's lovely to see you.
Yeah.
You know, let me just, at the risk of embarrassing myself, mention something else off script.
Yeah.
Ever since the role you played as Daniel Nyati,
yeah,
I have never rested. Everybody insists I know where you are, I know what you do, and so I'm here to set the record straight.
Yeah,
that no such thing.
I know.
But on to more serious matters, it's lovely to speak to you,
right.
especially because many people recognize you and consider you one of the, and I hope you're not offended by this, but one of the elders in the country with a wealth of experience, a take on what it's taken really to survive the darkest hours in this country.
Yeah.
Today we happen to be marking 1 year since the July unrest, and I wonder where your headspace is at.
You know, I think the July 8th situation is actually a sad, I think, period in our lives as South Africans. Because, and I think it just shows how maybe we haven't moved from apartheid. Apartheid is gone, but somehow it is still left in our minds. And we haven't come to a state of owning up or feeling that we belong. And if there's one thing that apartheid and I think colonialism did, they actually just stripped a sense of belonging and a sense of knowing that whatever we have around us has been given to us by life. You know what I mean? And that's what, you know, basically colonialism did, because with the I think the dispossession of land, and which is actually I think where it all started. Dispossession of land made us to feel displaced. We never owned anything, so we don't feel a sense of that whatever we have to protect.
Sure. Interesting, because at the time that this was happening, people who couldn't relate to the people taking part in the riots kept asking questions around, how could you do this to something that is at your service? You know?
Look, I mean, sorry to interrupt you. And, you know, I remember, for instance, I mean, I was part of the 76 generation. I mean, I was only 16 years old when, you know, 76 happened. And at that time, the sense that we had that everything belonged to the white man. And that is why we destroyed, we burned, whatever. But that mentality hasn't changed. Because every time when we want to show dissatisfaction, what do? We destroy.
Right.
And we haven't learned. I mean, one thing that fascinated me at one stage was during the bus strike here in South Africa, there was a bus strike in Japan. And the bus drivers didn't stop going to work. They went to work, but made the passengers not to pay. And they hit where it hurts most. Ours, or when we go on strike, we actually hold everything down and we bring everybody down. There's somewhere there's got to be a paradigm shift and re-look at how we raise our dissatisfaction.
Sure. And that paradigm shift often happens when we get a moment to reflect about where we are, and much of that happens at the theatre.
Yes.
I must be honest, you know.
And, you know, I mean, we're dealing with, and one thing that has always fascinated me was how we have had people who have been thinkers, people who use their intellect, you know, and use their intellect in, even in making sure that they understand the enemy. You know what I mean? We talk about Bloke Mudisani. I mean, this is just a simple African boy growing up in Sophia Town. But look at how he actually got himself to master the Queen's language or the colonizer's language. And when he writes, I mean, he writes so brilliantly. The use of words, the use of the language is just out of this world.
I want to make sure everyone's keeping up with us here. No? So let's take a few steps back. Bloke Modisane is one of the prominent actors that are featured in this play. That's going to be the personalities. Right. He's the character that is made to come alive.
Yes.
Tell us who this guy was and how he landed up in the UK.
Yes.
Because that's also part of the story.
Bloke Modisane is one of the journalists of the 50s, drum journalist in the 50s. And while he was a journalist, there was a communication with Langston Hughes, who is the African-American poet, to an extent that, Langston Hughes actually been judged the short stories that, Drum Magazine actually, put a short story competition. Langston Hughes was part of that competition. And I think, in fact, Langston Hughes has a very strong leaning and affinity to Africa, and it had to do with his upbringing. Langston Hughes was, his father was basically anti-black. He hated black people. In fact, Langston Hughes says that in the play, that my father, hated black people, and which means somehow he hated himself. But the person who basically gave him a sense of owning up to his blackness was his grandmother. And I think that led him now to try and find an affinity with Africa. And the very first place that he went to was go to Senegal. And now because he was a black person, light-skinned, black people in Senegal said, like, no, you're not black, you're not African, know. But, and it deals with, the play deals with a question of identity, and the Bloke Modisane, being a Sophia town, goes to school, learns English, becomes brilliant. Blokes, because of apartheid, 1948 brought the National Party, and the National Party just began closing down, and with the destruction of Sophia Town, Blokes, blame me on history. The way he actually talks about having to leave South Africa, and how that it was, in fact, the destruction of Sophia Town was almost a destruction of him.
Right.
And he goes to London. He suffers exile anxieties, and somebody who comes to his assistance is Langston Hughes, because they're constantly writing to each other, And Siphiwo Mahala, who wrote the play, basically was in America, Connecticut. I got this word right. And he went to a university in Connecticut, discovered these letters, decided to write a play.
Sure.
Devise a play about it.
And you, through your powers, decided to put the play on.
Yes.
Part of the obvious questions to ask is, why do you think this is an important story to tell now? As you were speaking,
yes.
I'm already drawing parallels. Ironically, even as we mark 1 year since this July unrest around the destruction of infrastructure, much of that happened in Sophia Town, and how this is, in some ways, linked to reckoning with one's identity and how they relate to their world.
Blokes, talking about today, Bloke in his book, he talks about, when he talks why they ended up writing short stories. They had to write short stories because they couldn't think ahead. They couldn't plan for a novel. And even in analysis of short story writing, it talks about black people having a short-term morality.
Wow, unpack that. What does that mean? Bombshell.
Short-term morality, which means we live for now. We don't live for tomorrow. And you see, for instance, with the unrest, this is what happened. We lived for now, and we don't think about the future. And this thing is something that is has been, in fact, I think, infused into our lives by colonialism and by apartheid, because at the end of the day, when you didn't own land, you just lived in order to, farm laborers basically had to pay with their services, and they never had a sense of belonging. They couldn't think of the future. They couldn't think of investment. And that is, this basically just, for me, explains why we are where we are.
Sure. Short-term morality is one side of the coin. The other side might be instant gratification.
But I think it's much deeper than that.
Yeah.
I think it is much deeper than that. And like I say, if we look at how we got basically like dispossessed of land,
right?
And black people owned land, And 1910 came, I actually call 1910 as I say it was colonialism on steroids. You know what I mean? For black South Africans. Because then, with 1910, it was after the Anglo-Boer War. What happened when the English and the Dutch then, and the British began to do, they talked among themselves and sidelined the black people. And that's how the Union of South Africa was formed in 1910. And come 1913, the Land Act. Total dispossession. Black people are tenants in their own land. Those who even became laborers. So black people, we actually lost everything. And you make somebody lose a home. You displace them.
Yeah, of course. You know, given that history, which is still so real, because people who are alive today lived through it, and I don't think that the people appreciate how important that is. But what I'm getting to is today, there's a level of dissatisfaction that exists because the government that was meant to change all of this has disappointed so many people, and that's putting it mildly.
Yeah.
I wonder, you know, in what ways that can be used to propel us to the direction we want to be headed, as opposed to us languishing really in what feels to some people like a very hopeless situation.
We've got to start telling stories that actually highlights and heightens our, basically, what our dignity. Because at the moment, I think, you know, to be black is to be chaotic, to be disorderly. But when I remember how I grew up, even during the height of apartheid, there was order, semblance of order in the township. There was a semblance of order in schools. You know, I went to a school recently, you know, and I remember that when we were standing in assembly, we would stand in lines, you know, of the different classes. At the moment, it's just mix and mingle. People are having, you know, whatever learners now, you know, pupils, whatever students, have their hands in their pockets. I mean, that is, and so if we don't have a certain kind of order, and we've got to start telling stories that just shows that we are human beings and we do have a certain semblance, like I said earlier on, of orderliness.
Absolutely. We started our conversation with you saying you're happy to be on TV. Well, we're happy that you're also a director of this play, which I think explores so many of the things that we're still grappling with today.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming in to speak to us.
It's
at the State Theatre, 7th till the 24th of this month.
Yes.
It's called Bloke and
if I could add,
Bantu.
every Sunday we're going to be having panel discussions, so the question and answers are there. So we'll,
fantastic. So the conversation continues there.
Absolutely.
Sello Maake, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Legendary actor, director as well. And look out for that play, Bloke and his American Bantu at the State Theatre.